The medieval era was a very confusing place, where alternate histories have to struggle against the sheer weight which single battles and marriages can have on the future of nations. Today is one of those stories, where the fate of several kingdoms relied on the outcome of a few battles. Our story starts in 1400, a time when, usually, the 100 Years' War might be the focus of conversation. Yet, in the period we're focusing on today, there was actually a truce in this war, as England was exhausted and King Richard II just didn't care too much to pursue a war with France. A treaty was negotiated, England only retaining minor territories along the coast. And, at least for now, it seemed like France had practically won the struggle. Yet, Richard II's reign became very unpopular, and a group of nobles called the Lords Appellant took over governance, until John of Gaunt, in name of Richard, defeated them. But this too didn't last long, as John died and Richard disinherited his son Henry. This Henry having been a part of the former Lords Appellant. Understandably, he was pretty mad about this whole affair. So, Henry Bolingbroke returned to England and successfully started a campaign to become King of England himself. Yet, having usurped power, Henry IV's position was far from secure. So, he had the captive Richard starved to death, he fought a conflict with the Scots, and then had to contend with an uprising from the Percy family in the north. This uprising will become relevant later. All of this coincided with events in Wales. Traditionally, the region was divided between Gwynedd, Powys, and the Deheubarth, which, in various arrangements, struggled over Welsh hegemony. A big reason for this continual division were the traditional Cymry succession system, in which territory was divided roughly equally between sons. Therefore, even figures which temporarily united various parts of Wales often saw their realms partitioned upon death, and thus, Welsh political unity was simply never that strong. Beyond these internal divisions, England always loomed large over Wales. Aside from fighting in France, attempting to subjugate the Cymry was one of the core aspects of being an English king. Yet, much to Wales's credit, they managed to maintain their independence for centuries. This would then slowly start to change around the year 1000, from where, slowly but steadily, direct and indirect English rule began to creep up. Then, around 1270, Llewellyn of Gwynedd had a pretty good shot at unifying the Welsh. But after his death, England took a more direct role than ever. And ever since that point, heirs to the English throne have been styled as Prince of Wales. This status quo would persist for about a century, until 1400, when Owain Glyndwr rose up. He was a man with noble blood from all three traditional major Welsh principalities. Himself also a powerful noble, he had prior served in the English army, gaining crucial military experience, before returning home and tending to his estates. For about a decade, he simply lived in peace. But then, his patience got tested. His neighbour stole some land, and English Parliament refused to help him. He was then, intentionally, not informed of a war with Scotland, and therefore he failed to show up with the levies expected of him, and he was branded a traitor. When he was then directly threatened, he would start his Welsh revolt. Owain would begin styling himself the Prince of Wales, and the revolt he led would prove to be the final major attempt to achieve Welsh independence. After some shocking victories, Owain rallied the people, taking advantage of the political instability in England at the time, to liberate nearly all of his homeland. But Glyndwr almost went even further. During a battle, he captured Edmund Mortimer, a powerful southern English noble. Mortimer's defeat in battle, apparently, was because his Welsh forces had deserted him. Yet, Henry IV thought that his betrayal ran deeper, alleging that he got captured on purpose. His family was forbidden from paying the ransom necessary for his release, and Mortimer thus decided to switch sides to Glyndwr. He married the latter's daughter, and proclaimed his support for the restoration of King Richard II, unless he was dead, which he was, in which case he would instead support his own nephew, also named Edmund Mortimer, who was a great-great-grandson of King Edward III and had been the heir presumptive to Richard II before his being deposed. This makeshift alliance then grew further with the previously mentioned Percy rebellion in the north of England, who now linked their struggle to Glyndwr as well. Their initial revolt had failed, and their famed leader, Henry Hotspur, was killed in battle, but the family would continue the fight. Cooperations between the Mortimers, Percys and Glyndwr would continue, reaching its zenith with conclusion of the tripartite indenture. This indenture was essentially an agreement to partition England between the three factions. Glyndwr would get his independence Wales, but also a very significant chunk of Western England. The Percys would gain overlordship over Northern England, and the younger Mortimer would be installed as King of England. It seemed like the parties were truly preparing the destruction of England as we know it. Yet, in our timeline, the alliance collapsed not too long after. The agreement was brokered at the height of the rebellion in 1405. Wales was under Glyndwr, the Percys were in rebellion, and France was providing troops and money to the Welsh. Yet, in 3 years' time, everything would collapse. In 1407, the English regained the initiative in Wales. In 1408, the Percys would be defeated, and in 1409, Mortimer the Elder would die in combat as Glyndwr was practically defeated, Wales returning to English hegemony. He would fight a guerrilla campaign for 6 more years, but this too eventually ended. In the centuries that followed, Welsh independence was further and further reduced, until eventually the laws of Wales Acts of 1535 and 1542 were enacted. These acts removed even the notion of Wales being a principality separate from England, the only notion of its former separation being the remnant title Prince of Wales. From this point, all the way up to the devolution of Wales in 1998, the region was regarded as nothing but a constituent part of England. Thus, Glyndwr's struggle is a fundamental one for the Welsh people, and imagining him successful is therefore an attractive concept. Luckily, in a medieval scenario, while I do reckon it unlikely, the idea of the rebellion winning a few more battles, perhaps capturing or killing Henry IV, and implementing their plans in some form or another, is not too crazy. Perhaps we prevent the death of the capable Henry Hotspur, and the Welsh and Percy armies link up for a crucial fight, which they win. Truthfully, the details of their military victory don't matter too much. Point is, what if they were successful? I'm sorry for the quick intermission, but by far most of you aren't subscribed. To keep up to date with all the latest releases, consider doing so. Thank you. The most important question is what happens after. The tripart partition is clear as to the borders of influence, but not about much else. How these realms are to be set up is crucial in the future of all of Europe. Wales is the easiest, as they simply gain sovereignty, breaking away from England fully. In the south, the crown of England goes to Edmund Mortimer's 14-year-old nephew, Edmund Mortimer. On paper, this isn't too controversial, as it can be easily argued that after Richard II, the throne should have passed to this Mortimer, though his claim came through the female line, while that of Henry Bolingbroke had come through the male line. I understand the details of family trees and claims is a bit confusing. All you need to know is, Mortimer did have a pretty strong claim. Strong enough that, inherently, it shouldn't have been all too controversial for him to become king. Yet, due to the way it occurred, I still predict many issues. It is Northumbria which raises by far the most questions. Did the Percys plan to truly split from England, declaring themselves independent dukes or even kings of Northumbria? Or was the plan more mild? And would the Percys simply become the predominant family in the north within the English kingdom? If the two sides hoped to have any shot at long-term success, this second option would have been far, far smarter. Now, before we actually start wrestling with the medieval politics resulting from this deal, it is crucial to keep one thing in mind. The deal was never made with the intention to create a long-term, stable new system in England. For Glyndwr, all the deal was a way to secure his Welsh state. If England immediately crashed and burned afterwards, that was only good for him. And considering the positions the Mortimers and Percys have placed themselves in, crashing and burning is indeed a very possible future for the English kingdom. As despite the Mortimers having a decent claim to the English throne, they immediately stumble upon a whole load of issues. They rode into power on the backs of Welsh soldiers and French money. Them then recognizing Welsh independence would already be bad, but ceding all of that English land to Wales would be extremely insulting. You can bet that any noble which has lost land in this deal is going to oppose this new regime. Even more, all the other powerful noble families in the north, chiefly the Nevilles and the Yorks, are going to cooperate against the Percys. Of all the lands which the Percys now claim, their actual control was very limited and only focused on the true north. Even if they manage to secure their position in this region, they have practically no way of enforcing their claim over the entire Midlands. These issues are then compounded by the remnants of Henry IV's Lancasters. Even if he is dead, and perhaps his eldest son dies in battle too, Henry had 4 sons in total. At least one of them will be at the center of anti-Mortimer plots, as well as the wealthy and capable widow Joan. While there might be a period of calm after the initial battle, it will take immense political capital to secure the Mortimer-Percy position in the long term. Now technically, the French could be the key in securing the 3 new rulers' positions. If they so choose, French power on the British Isles will be stronger than it has ever been before. Scotland was already a traditional French ally, and the Welsh will soon find themselves in a similar position. If Northumbria is indeed fully independent, this will provide yet more opportunity. But even without it, should France continue to foster division within the English kingdom, this would essentially be the end of England's ability to threaten France, the end of the 100 Years' War, which would now be known only as a 50 Years' War. For the remnants of this video, I will cut the timeline in 2. In the first, we will take a look at the more realistic outcome of Glyndwr's plan. He legitimizes his independent Wales, and England essentially falls into a renewed civil war, both between the Mortimers and Lancasters over the throne, but also between nobles and the king over privileges and power. England as a kingdom will remain unified, but fundamentally weakened, their future totally altered. In the second scenario, we will delve a bit more into unrealism, where we will assume that Northumbria does indeed become fully independent, and we will give the Mortimers and the Percys the benefit of the doubt, and we will thus be assuming that they succeed in solidifying the bulk of their positions. So let's start with the first, more realistic scenario. Henry IV is captured or killed in some decisive battle, and Mortimer declares his nephew the King of England, and swiftly recognizes Owain as the Prince of Wales. From here, the specifics get murky, but aside from occupying the borderlands promised to him, Owain essentially retreats to the background. There is little to be gained from him to put up significant forces in the upcoming chaos in England. If anything, Welsh forces assisting the Mortimers in consolidating power would only weaken their legitimacy. Between the Percys and the Mortimers, it are likely the Percys which, first of all, see their new domain crumble. They might be able to secure a couple new territories in the north, ceded from the crown to the Percys, but they are unable to drive their power further south. Far from coming to rule all of England, the Percy family is simply one of the most dominant northern families, but also one which is greatly distrusted and even disliked by many of their peers. The position of the young Mortimer as king might be a bit more secure. With Henry IV dead, and let's say his eldest son too, and Richard II passed away years ago, it is undeniable that the young king's claim to the throne is relatively strong, only rivaled by the kids of Henry IV. It also really helps that he is only a child, and thus he can't be directly blamed for the events that are unfolding. Yet, it is not the new young king which the realm's anger is directed at. It is instead his regent, the scheming, elder Edmund Mortimer. He will be despised. In the eyes of many, he had just sold out the kingdom to the Welsh and the French. I find it hardly unbelievable that the kingdom might come to accept the young king, but only after his uncle was removed from power. Now it is difficult, dare I say impossible, for me to predict the specifics of the scheming, wars and politics which will now take place within England in the decade following. Thus, let's instead focus on what we know for certain won't happen, but did historically. And that is what, in our timeline, proved to be the final stage of the 100 Years' War. After about 3 decades of English control being almost destroyed, King Henry V, son of Henry IV, suddenly pulled a major upset and succeeded in conquering near most of France, even being officially named regent and heir of Charles VI, the King of France at the time. Unfortunately for Henry, he would die only 2 months before Charles himself did, which threw quite a spanner in the creation of the Franco-English dual monarchy. The throne became contested between the capable Charles VII of France and the incapable Henry VI. Add in Joan of Arc to give a nice morale boost to the French, and soon the English presence on the continent was nearly fully gone. The 100 Years' War was over. There are a lot of reasons why all of this wouldn't happen here, and a lot of reasons why this might matter a lot for the future of Europe. Glyndwr's victory would have sent shockwaves across England, being a major humiliation and rebuke of their power on their own island. This is then followed either by a civil war, or at best with a tenuous and weak Mortimer kingship. It seems doubtful that the king might mobilize a force strong enough to engage France in the near term. Beyond that, Henry V was simply an extraordinarily capable leader, and I do doubt that his replacement has the same qualifications and goals as he had. Henry V's successes in our timeline were already a long shot, and I think it unthinkable that they might be repeated in this timeline. Should England prepare for a major war, Wales will be the state it would be directed at. This then forces me to discuss the affairs of France prior to Henry V's invasions. The previously mentioned Charles VI had taken the throne in 1380, and by all accounts, it was a pretty great time to be a French monarch. His father had reconquered many territories from the English and centralized more power in the crown. Yet, young King Charles was only 11, and thus was placed under the custody of his uncles, who represented some of the most powerful vassals within France. Upon the age of 20, Charles took up ruling himself, but only 3 years later, he started suffering bouts of insanity. Unable to effectively rule, a regency was reimposed on the now adult king, with power primarily being fought over by John of Burgundy, Louis of Orleans, and Charles's wife, Isabeau of Bavaria. This would spark a civil war within France, known as the Armagnac-Burgundian Civil War. It was sparked by Louis driving John out of the politics of the kingdom, and usurping more power, money, and privileges in the process. John, finding this unacceptable, had Louis assassinated and seized power instead. Forces of Burgundy would even at some point come to occupy Paris, and an attempt at negotiating a peace would lead to John of Burgundy being betrayed and killed. Yet, the civil war was cut short, as Henry V would invade the nation. It would mainly be the forces of the Armagnacs which would fight the English invaders, many of which would die at the Battle of Agincourt. While this was happening, the Burgundians allied themselves to the English, using this invasion to strengthen their own position. Later then, once the French position improved, the Burgundians swapped back to the French side, with the new Duke Philip signing a treaty which officially released the Duke from his vassalage to the French king. This was the start of a period in which Burgundy, while it would officially remain a part of the French kingdom, in practice became a near-independent state. This was solidified by major expansions into the wealthy Low Countries, as well as participation in plots which further weakened the power of the French king. Now, without the intervention of England, the future of France is very likely altered. Most notably, I believe the Armagnac cause to be significantly strengthened. John the Fearless's role in the assassination of Louis was well known, and the bulk of French nobles aligned against the Burgundians, including the heir to the throne, Charles. Yet, any pressure on Burgundy was wholly relieved by the English invasion. Without it, I dare to say that the future of Burgundy is in jeopardy, and I find it rather plausible that they eventually face a heavy defeat. This doesn't necessarily destroy Burgundy, but at the very least, it could prevent their increasing independence. Likewise, this could interfere with the ambitions of Philip, who in our timeline had conquered Holland and Hainaut, inherited Brabant from his cousin, and bought Luxembourg from Bohemia. Aside from the inheritance of Brabant, the Burgundians might never achieve such great expansions in this timeline. The effect of this compounds as we continue the scenario, as it really is rather plausible that Burgundy never separates from France, which swiftly escalates as a centralized France might then come to look something like this. Considering most of our timeline's 1500s and 1600s was spent by France trying to conquer these exact territories, starting with them might prove to create a terrifyingly powerful France. Even more, it is important to note that the historical union of the Austrian Habsburgs and Spain went through Charles V, as his father was Philip the Handsome of Burgundy, whose father was in turn Maximilian of Austria, while Charles's mother was Joanna, the Queen of Spain. We might thus have not just created a stronger France, the territories, its borders, might also be far more fragmented, and the Habsburg alliance between Spain and Austria might be in jeopardy. Essentially, geopolitics as we knew them in the 1500s are completely gone, and I have no reason to doubt that the main benefactor is likely to be France. To conclude this first scenario, let us move back to England and Wales, where I must immediately put into question the Welsh ability to maintain their independence in the long term. Even in our timeline, Owain's successes had mainly been due to division in England, and once the full might of the English kingdom was deployed against him, he swiftly lost. At the end of the day, England has 10 times the population, and while the Welsh would surely give them a bloody nose in renewed conflict, I do not doubt that at some point, the English would come to govern Wales once more. I might have given Glyndwr's Welsh state a bit more of the benefit of the doubt, had he not seized such extensive English territories. In my opinion, this was a rather unintelligent move from Glyndwr. These territories were profoundly English, and to the nobles of England and the people who remained in them, the reclamation of said territories would be paramount. A war with Wales was no longer merely a war to conquer a foreign foe. It was a war to reclaim lost English territory. For perhaps a few decades, an independent Wales might enrich the world, with Owain planning a Welsh parliament, the creation of 2 universities, and the restoration of traditional Welsh laws. How successful he is in those endeavors is difficult to say, and really depends on how long it takes England to reclaim the territory. as well as whether his realm is, as is Welsh tradition, divided amongst his 5 sons, or however many come to outlive him. As such divisions, even if one remains the official leader, are not conducive to combating the English threat. Yet still, even if Wales is reconquered after perhaps a few decades, that does not mean Owain's struggles were necessarily in vain. During his years in power, Welsh nobles would be empowered, English castles are seized, English nobles and English settlements are destroyed or evicted. The hope is that the consequence of such events are such to perhaps increase Welsh privilege and autonomy, and, at least compared to our timeline's full incorporation into England, the English-Welsh relationship, at least for a while, might more closely resemble that of England and Scotland centuries later. We shouldn't think this guaranteed, but it is quite possible that the Welsh culture, identity and political power is significantly strengthened compared to our timeline. Once Wales is reintegrated, the future of English politics are completely changed, and it becomes impossible to go into detail. The famed War of the Roses are completely gone, with all dynasties and major political families completely warped. A big factor in English politics could be the lack of a final, decisive confrontation between London and Paris, which we got historically due to Henry V. While England might still lose their continental holdings, there is at least the potential that English kings remain more delusional in their claim over France. Alternatively, the period of Franco-English tensions might just end in a very anticlimactic manner, as the English are forced to focus on the British Isles instead. So by this point, the main thing we know is that we know nothing, except that there is a significant chance that England is weakened to such an extent that France is permanently strengthened, with the major potential butterfly effects of removing the Burgundian realm and the world-defining Habsburg Empire. Even more so than in our own timeline, Western European geopolitics is focused simply on restraining French expansion, though whether they are successful is a very open question, and we may very well have sleepwalked into a Europe dominated by the French. Now then, if we discuss the other version of this scenario, where we do indeed assume the full destruction of England and its full division, while assuming the Mortimers and Percys are relatively successful in maintaining their power, meaning they don't immediately collapse and reunify under the Mortimer or a different king, the timeline becomes slightly different. Yet, it is important to recognize that most of what we have already discussed is still true. Yet the difference is, we have now even further crippled one of the main enemies to French hegemony in Europe. In the previous scenario, in the long term, we haven't necessarily weakened England that much. Sure, the early 1400s would be an embarrassing and painful era for England, but after Wales is reintegrated and the monarchy in some way stabilized, I think England can rebound to about the same position as in our timeline. That is not the case here. The full division of the realm tears apart noble families, who generally have holdings in both, but at least initially, the rulers of both states are in alliance, giving the Northumbrians time to consolidate their position before the near inevitable conflicts between the states begin. The division of England also gives Wales a far more comfortable position, and while it is possible that England and Northumbria cooperate against Wales, and succession laws in Wales could still lead to a weakening of their position, we once more at least increase the odds for Wales to secure their long-term power and autonomy. This opens us up to many questions about the long term, with a large variety of options for the future. For example, English power in Ireland will be near unholdable without control over the west coast, which might open the door to Irish unification, or to simply keep the island in their traditional division, potentially even allowing other powers to seek conquest there. Wales and Scotland might initially be jointly allied to France and each other, yet they do need to be careful. With how much weaker we have made England, France might be far less invested in the region as they were historically. A falling out between the two English realms seems near inevitable. The region had been unified so long, there'd be nobles on both sides wishing for reunification. This leaves quite a dilemma for states like Wales and Scotland, who on the one hand greatly benefit from the division of England in the long term, yet in the short term might stand to benefit from a weakening of Northumbria. Hence, the outcomes range from the division lasting, potentially with a broad anti-English coalition in the north, to potential partitions of the Northumbrian state, the solidification of a strong Wales, to their inevitable doom. In large part, the British Isles are simply left to themselves, a mere side note in the far more high-stakes competition for power on the mainland. An island consuming itself with violence, at least for the foreseeable future. Once more, this bolsters French hegemony over the continent, and if France plays their cards right, England can be kept down permanently. The actions of Owain Glyndwr might have unintentionally destroyed the two biggest rivals to French power. I doubt that this is what he had in mind during his struggle for independence. Yet, for as long as Wales maintains its independence from England, I don't think this is a world that he would have objected to. The actions of a single Welshman have radically altered the world forever. Wales has been the David that slayed the Goliath that was England. Yet the true victor had simply been watching on the sidelines. For now though, this is the end of the video. Thank you all for watching and consider leaving a like and a comment as well as subscribing. If you've enjoyed this video, click the video on top to watch another in this series. If you've already seen it, I'm sure the bottom video is great too. Once again, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.